All right. So the next one we're going to be looking at is called the overly broad thesis. And that's pretty self-explanatory. The thing is that this means that you have to think critically about what you are capable of doing. And what I mean by that is you want your thesis to be as specific as possible, and it should be tailored to reflect the scope of the paper. This is kind of a big deal. Reflect the scope of the paper. So it's not possible, for instance, to write about the history of English literature in a 5-page paper. In addition to choosing simply a smaller topic, strategy to narrow a thesis includes specifying a method or perspective or delineating certain limits. This is a big deal. And this is going to be even more important for you in your paper. I expect you to make an argument, like in the non-thesis, not like the non-thesis thesis, but in the overly broad thesis, in particular with all of your assignments here, you're going to want to narrow down like what or about whom are you speaking. Particularly with your educational policy essay, you need to think about like, am I talking about all high schoolers? Am I talking about Mahtomedi high schoolers? Am I talking about students K-12? Is the policy I want to institute, is it more for elementary schools? And so you need to think critically about who are you going to tailor this towards. Is there a certain grade? Is there a certain age? Is it to teachers? Is it to students? Is it to an admin? Like, this is, when you narrow down, that makes it clear where you might be going or what you're going to be doing, or how you're going to be addressing these topics in your paragraph or in your entire essay. But it also lets you know, like, I have a certain amount of space. I can't address everything. So for example, you have a 2 to 3 page paper. You don't even have 5 as it says here. You have a 2 to 3 page paper. You can't address everything. So if you think that you're going to make a policy that changes you're going to go every year and like, here's what needs to happen in kindergarten, here's what needs to happen in 1st grade, 3rd grade, 2nd grade, you absolutely cannot do that. Okay, so think about critically about how can you address a policy in 2 to 3 pages, and use your thesis to show the parameters of this. So let's take a look at what that means. So here's the bad thesis number 1. Teenagers should not be required to have a job in the summer. Okay, now at least it's an argument, so that's good. But this is an insanely big argument. So like, how many different reasons? We have no idea. This thesis simply says should not be required. So how many reasons are they going to address? I have no idea. I'm pretty sure I can think of at least 13 different reasons off the top of my head. This student is not giving me a clear understanding of like what the limitations of this argument are. And I don't mean limitations as in like what limits it in a bad way. Limitations as in like the like I'm not addressing everything type of limitations. Let's take a look and see how this thesis got better. Teenagers should not be required to engage in work or other structured activities if they are using the time to relieve themselves of social and emotional burdens of school, while also avoiding the consumption trap as identified in Sass's article. So here's how they limited their argument. So they shouldn't be required to engage in work or other structured activities. So they did actually broaden it up a little bit. This just said job. So they are specifying like work or structured activities if they're using the time to relieve themselves of the social emotional burdens of school while avoiding the consumption trap. That's the consuming stuff like technology and things like that. So here's what I see. Look at the different potential topics that I see or sections of this paper. I see one section talking about teenagers working, right? So there's going to be the first section is going to be talking about like people wanting to have students work. Then I see another section about the social and emotional burdens of school. And then I also see a section of the consumption trap. So this is 3 different sections talking about teenagers being expected to work, then reasons why they shouldn't work, another reason why they shouldn't work. And if you notice, this second section could be split into 2 different body paragraphs. So this paper is articulating a clear focus of the argument that could be 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs long, 3 or 4 paragraphs long. So teenagers are expected to work, but they shouldn't if they are relieving social stresses, emotional burdens, or the consumption trap here. Actually, I'm getting confused by my own anyways. So there's at least 3 different topics, or 3 different sections of the paper, and each section is at least 1 body paragraph. Let's take a look at the other bad thesis for this section there for the second the overly broad thesis. So here's what we've got. Parents and guardians should be the ones to decide what teenagers do with their free time. That is a major argument. Like that, I think that there are entire books talking about parents and their involvement of in their students' free time, or in their child's free time. So like the fact that there are entire books about how to involve yourself or what the appropriate limits are, this wouldn't be a good idea for a 2 to 3 page paper. Not even, this isn't even a good idea for a 20-page paper. That's insanity. That's an incredibly large argument. It's overly broad. It does not guide you or your reader as to what specifically you'll be talking about. I know that you're going to be talking about parents and their involvement of their child's free time. Not really how or why, so then this needs to be clarified. Let's take a look at the next better thesis. How would we make this one better? Well, today's teenagers do suffer from a more detrimental lack of motivation than previous generations. Simply putting them to work or having them read a book hardly solves the problem. Instead, these young adults should be provided adult models in teachers and politicians who work hard for the benefit of all to instill a motivation in Generation Z. So, notice how the first thing is you're probably going to say, OMG, 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 that thesis statement is 2 sentences long, OMG, 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 OMG. And I would say, chill out. Your thesis statement can be 2 sentences long. That's totally fine, as long as it's a good, well-developed argument. And let's take a look at the different sections that I see here. So the first one is, while teenagers do suffer from a lack of motivation, that's one section. Simply putting them to work hardly solves the problem. It's another section. Instead, these young adults should be provided teachers and politicians who work for the benefit of all. And then instilling motivation. So look at this. I've got 4 sections of this paper. Teenagers, so I would say that this is a paragraph that they lack motivation compared to different generations, or that could be even 2 paragraphs, one about previous generations and one about today, and then putting them to work, how that isn't actually effective in motivating them, and then what are actual ways to motivate them and how it actually does motivate them. So, whoo-hoo! This is a good solid thesis that has 1, 2, 3, 4 sections and a minimum of 4 body paragraphs. So this is being more specific about what needs to happen. So it's not just saying like, oh, they got to figure something out about their free time. No, it's specifically saying not just free time. What's the problem with their free time? Well, they got to get motivated. And here are ways that don't motivate them, and here are ways that do, and here's how it does that. So that is how you avoid an overly broad thesis. Look for multiple sections and make sure that you are limiting yourself to what a paper of 2 to 3 pages would address.